than one operational period in a day. So if you just think about it as this is one day, we go around the circle one time, then you get the real gist of it. But again, that tail of the P, these initial meetings and the initial briefings are often already done, and people are rolling, and planes are in the air and people are on the ground before you even get started, like even before you get organized, right? Before you get the command post up and running, before everything happens. So when you're talking about a WLE, or you're talking about the big eval for us, we will often do these initial response or this initial planning, like the Thursdays or even Wednesday before the event. You don't try to do this initial response on the Saturday, because during the Saturday is when your incident command post is open, you're up and running, and everything goes. So that Saturday morning is usually this green box, which means you've already gone all the way around the P the first time. And then on Saturday, during the day, you go around the P the second time, planning for Sunday. So during Saturday, you're ahead of the game, thinking about what are we going to be doing tomorrow. So that's the key thing to think about in terms of timing and time frame, is that the planning P is really most of the time worrying about tomorrow, not worrying about, I just got my incident, what am I doing, right? Because that's all part of this reflex tasking. All right, so let's go with diving into the incident commander. Obviously, all of these definitions and things are straight out of the ICS 300 textbook. The incident commander is obviously the most in charge person, giving direction, communicating, being the manager on scene. They used to be called mission manager. That was the term that was used. The incident commander is supposed to not get involved in details, meaning they're not the ones on the radio. Now, again, we're talking about the WLE, we're talking about the big incidents. We're not talking about when you roll out ICS in a small capacity and maybe the incident commander is the only person. In a big scale, in a big scenario, they're not on the radio. You have radio folks, you have radio room that's in another area, and hopefully you've got messengers that are giving information to the incident commander in a reliable manner, so that the incident commander doesn't feel like they have to go walk over to the operations section chief and say, I want that plane to go to this location, right? That level of detail is not where the incident commander should be operating. The incident commander does create these incident objectives, and we'll get into a little bit of an exercise of doing that, just so that the incident commander, what these incident objectives are that the incident commander is trying to develop, is clear sort of to everybody what kinds of things we're talking about. Those incident objectives go onto the ICS 202 form. They do clarify policy issues, and policy can be anything from we're going to have a hard deck of 2,000 feet for this exercise for some reason, or we're going to keep people out of this particular mountain pass because I don't think it's safe and I don't want to send people in there. So whatever the sort of boundaries are, that's the incident commander's responsibility. Jurisdictional concerns under unified command. Obviously, we haven't practiced a lot of unified command. That is, on my hit list of things for us to get more involved with. But when you're in a unified command situation, that means you've got, for example, the Coast Guard out there flying next to you. So if the Coast Guard's got a helicopter and they're flying, to 1,500 feet, and we say, okay, our planes are going to have a hard deck of 2,000 feet and we're not going to go below, that's the incident commander's job to work with the Coast Guard and figure out what sort of boundaries we're going to have between our planes to help deconflict, both in the air and, on the ground, at the ramp, trying to get fuel at the same time, all the other things that sort of happen when you get into multi-agency searches. That's where the incident commander spends a lot of time on the phone, talking with the other agencies, figuring out what's going on. It is also the incident commander's job to, and this is what we get graded on every time we do one of these things, assessing the request. So if the request comes in from, and Air Force usually simulates these requests, they might say something like, law enforcement has a prison break and they want us to assist with aerial reconnaissance while they're doing a pursuit. And the incident commander is the one that says, sorry, posse comitatus, we know the CAP rules. It's very clear in the 70-1, where we get involved, where we don't get involved. The incident commander's job is the one that looks at the situation and determines, is this something CAP should get involved in? Is this something that's appropriate for CAP to do? There's also the agency liaison that can do something like that, but ultimately the agency liaison is not authorized to like commit our resources to say, oh yeah, that's a task we can do. I'll send 3 planes. Only the incident commander has the authority to say, yes, I'm going to send 3 planes. So obviously the agency liaison can be there, especially if they're sitting in the EOC next to the Maui, fire police, whoever, and they're saying, hey, we can help you with this. Hey, we can send you photos of that. Hey, I can have a plane in here in 20 minutes. The agency liaison is allowed to be in that role, but they're not authorized to sort of pull the trigger, right? And to say, yes, we can commit this. They can have the conversation. They can dialogue with the other agencies, but only the incident commander or the deputy incident commander has the authority to say, okay, I'm going to actually launch a plane now. The incident commander also obviously approves the IAP. The IAP is the big incident action plan, the big report that has all of the operational details for the exercise. And we'll get into that a little bit as well. Operations section chief. Think of the ops section chief as the doers. Their primary responsibility is to execute and to get it done. They need to have staff, they need to have AOBDs that can run without supervision so that things can be happening in parallel, that all the planes can be being briefed at the same time, that air, ground, all the other assets, maybe you've got a specialty team or something else going on, you've got a VIP that's going to go for a joyride. All these things can be happening in parallel because the operations section chief has the staff to do it, to actually execute on that. Tactics are sort of how you achieve the results as opposed to strategy, which we'll talk about more later. Tactics are things like when the operations section chief looks at a task and they say, oh, this is a high mountain task, they also will have the list of resources, hopefully from the restat team, and they'll say, I want for this task the high altitude turbo, 206 to fly this. And so the operations section chief has that operational knowledge to be able to say, this is the right crew with the right training to be able to do this particular task. This is how I'm going to make the assignment. Now, the planning section chiefs often have some of that experience. They have the operational knowledge. They may even know who's night current and who's day VFR only. And they may make recommendations, but at the end of the day, it's the operations section chief and their staff's jobs to make the assignment and to say, this crew is flying that sortie. And, the incident commander can get in there and throw monkey wrenches in it, but the plan section chief is not the one making the decisions about that. In CAP, it's best for the operations section chief to retain the restat, the resources, who's available and who's going to be available tomorrow. Part of the reason for that in CAP is that the operations section chief often in their mind has this picture of, I have these planes. I have one on Maui, I've got two on Kauai, I've got one on the Big Island that's available right now. They have this mental catalog of the planes that are available. And because operations section chief has that knowledge, at their fingertips, and they're the ones responsible for making the assignment, it's best for them to also be the ones that know which of those planes have crews, right, can actually do the work. Sometimes, you've got a task on Molokai, and the planning section chief people can say, okay, well, we'd like to see the Wheeler people go over to Molokai and do this. But the operations section chief, because they've already tasked the Wheeler crew to do something else, they have that level of intimate knowledge and understanding of who's available, and to be able to say, you know what, in this regard, we want Maui, we'll take Wayne, we'll put him over there and go to Molokai, right? The operations section chief is the one that knows what's going on with his planes and where they are. So they're the most, it's the best idea for them to be the ones that are doing the restat and to continuing to maintain the list of who's available and when. Plans can, in traditional ICS, this would be a plans task, that the resources would come through plans, and operations section chief would simply get listed a handout that says, we've got these 6 people on the Big Island who are ready and these 4 people on Maui who are ready, and this is what you've got to work with, right? But in CAP, it just doesn't make sense, and it's not sort of how we work really well. So putting a restat under ops is really our big thing. The comm guys, again, the comm guys work under logistics, right? They don't report to the operations section chief, but there's a very intimate relationship between the communications and the operations people. And I know, Wayne, you went through this with an exercise, 2 exercises ago, where you felt like comm wasn't reporting back to the AOBDs when an important message had come through. Now, there's some stuff that comm does, which is very routine, the ops normal, the ops normal, ops normal. A lot of that, the AOBDs, they want to know also, but it's usually the big things like, oh, we're on scene, we've got a clue, we've had a sighting, all of those sort of big events that's not the sort of traditional communications have to go back to the operations section chief, and comms has to develop a method to keep the operations team appraised of what's going on the ground, what they're hearing, what the chatter is, what's happening. A lot of times the comm guys will simply say, well, I put it in the comm log. Why don't the AOBDs read the comm log? And if that's the method that the AOBD is comfortable with and it's agreed upon, then that's fine. But the point is, ops and comms need to agree on a process and then have a actual clear handshake about how we're going to keep this relationship going. Operations section chief works with the safety officers and the planning section chief to complete the 215 and the 215A. Those are those forms that are the resource and assignment forms. And we'll get into that very specifically, talking about sort of a good approach for how to complete those forms and how to hand off this process so that you're not duplicating work, is for the PSC to sort of start the form and then the operations section chief to sit down together and they complete it at the same time. That's really a good method for doing that. The last tag is that the operations section chief, I mean, obviously the incident commander is ultimately responsible for everybody, but the operations section chief is also, because they're responsible for all the assets, they are responsible for all the people, right? So we don't want to bend any metal and we don't want anybody bleeding, right? And all of that responsibility and safety process and procedure all relies on the operations section chief to make sure that everything is being done by the book and following the rules so that everybody is being taken care of and everybody is accounted for. Accountability is huge. We do this in the WOEs all the time where they evacuate the building and then they say, well, are you missing anybody, right? So now you got to do this nose count and figure out, well, who did we have in the building? Who was supposed to be in the building? Have we lost anybody? And so again, the operations section chief is responsible for all the people, whether they're in the building, in the air, whether the plane has gone missing or, is no longer responding. All of that goes back to the operations section chief. So a little bit more on the resources and the resource ordering. Plans defines the assignments, right? So they will tell you what bite-sized tasks can be done, and they should be able to develop a map and a description, and maybe have some lat longs, and whatever it is that you need to be able to say, this is a reasonable task for a plane to do. And obviously reasonable is like, what can be achieved in 2 hours or so, or what can be achieved without having to go all over the place. But usually the assignment is something that plans can develop and then guess how many planes or people or ground or air is going to be needed to achieve that task. So once they've written it up, they might say, okay, this is a ground team task, and they put it in the folder, right? Here's another aircraft task, and we put that in the folder, that kind of thing. So plans really focuses on chunking out the tasks, but not getting too much into the, well, who do I have to do that? So I'll write the task to fit that crew. That's not their responsibility. Operations will then sit down with that stack that plans have written, and they'll look at their list of how many resources they actually need. And they'll say, okay, in order to achieve these tasks, I'm going to need another plane. I don't have enough. So, okay, well, let's go put out another page and let's figure out. So in this case, we'll tell the logistics people to go page out again, ask for more resources or find somebody on Oahu to be able to do this task, because it doesn't make any sense to send the Kauai guys over to do this particular task that Plans has written for us. Sometimes ops can get creative and can say, okay, Plans, you've given me 2 tasks. I'm going to merge them. I'm just going to have one plane take care of these two things, and that's fine. You know, when plans writes the tasks, they're doing so with a certain set of knowledge and the experience and the intel that they have at the time. And obviously, that intel can change. So operations has full authority to say, plans, thank you very much for these tasks. I'm going to take this one and split it into two, or I'm going to take these two and merge them into one. Whatever they have to do, you know, that's fine for ops. Also, operations will sometimes be in a situation where you've got a plane in the air, they're doing something, you get a pop-up task, like an ELT comes up, and you say, okay, I'm going to divert this plane to go do this ELT, which means I need to now go get another plane to go finish this task that they've left behind, meaning I'm going to call logistics, and I'm going to say, okay, guys, get me another plane from Oahu to go finish this task, you know, over in Molokai, whatever it is, right? Operations is the one who knows how many planes and where they are, and keeps this sort of strategy in their mind of who's where. All right, planning section chief. So the big responsibility for the planning section chief is the situation map. And when you're talking about search and rescue, the map is really key, because you're trying to locate an object, you're trying to locate your target, whether it's a plane, a man in the water, or you know, a missing hiker. And obviously, where have I had planes and where have I searched is really critical. So keeping that map of where have I been, where have the planes covered, and how well did they cover them is planning section's like primary goal. And they should be able to hang that map up on the wall every day and brief the incident commander every day and say, here, this is what we've done. We've covered these grids twice. We've covered these grids 4 times. We've been in this area, but we've never gotten over these mountains because it's been foggy every day, and we've never been able to, you know, get to the right altitude to get up and over. So we still have a big question mark in this area over here where these mountains are, because we have not covered it thoroughly. We haven't been into this area. So all of the factors of weather and TFRs and fatigue, and whether something happened in flight that was distracting, say the crew got halfway through their assignment and then the ELT goes off, they've been diverted. Now, what do you do with that grid? Do you say it was half covered? Do you ask the crew to give you their tracks so that you can then download them and say, okay, realistically, they covered this much, but they were kind of distracted because they were here in the ELT, so their effectiveness wasn't very high. So I'm going to send another crew in to do the whole thing or half the thing. So that's plan's main focus, is what are we doing? What's the map? How much have we done? And compiling the data every day. The secondary thing is really this intel. So they call it the status board, or the plan's status board. Intel can be anything from, you know, we had a phone call, or a crew came back and told us we saw something funny, or the crew came back and told us, you know what, there's some really deep snow out there, we couldn't see a thing, you should probably send another crew, you know, when it's a little bit warmer and the snow has melted. So all of that tidbits, those little bits of advice and those little intelligence ideas need to start getting tracked. So planning section will sometimes have a spreadsheet going, or a status board where they're writing all of these intel things and they're following up on leads, specifically saying we did or did not get an opportunity to call this person back or talk to this airport manager because he wasn't on duty today, so we're going to have to wait till he goes on duty again tonight, and then we'll have to remember to call him back this evening. So all of those leads are the kinds of things that the planning section chief is also maintaining. So they've got the map and they've got this sort of board. Those are the different things. Scenarios, technical specialist. So Guy is a radar expert. So when a plane goes off radar and, you know, disappears either because it went too low or, you know, impacted terrain, or it just goes out of range of the radar, Guy is one of these people that lives in the Midwest, and he has access to all of the FAA data feeds. And so when we have a plane that has gone off radar, we usually pick up the phone and call him. He is a CAP member, and he does this just routinely all the time for all the searches. Anytime an incident commander needs radar tracks or needs radar data or needs to talk to an expert, what do you think of these radar tracks? This doesn't make sense. You know, their altitude was climbing, but their tracks are falling, and it looks like maybe they were in a left turn. I can't make sense of this, right? Guy is the person to sit down and have the conversation with, and he'll talk you through what does it mean and what are the limitations, and this particular radar edge boundary was at this location. So yes, you're getting some funny readings because of X, Y, and Z. That's obviously like a long phone call to have. If you have to call him and have that, you're not going to have your operations team put down the phone and stop paying attention to what the planes are doing. You have the planning section. The planning section is sort of not in the heat of the moment, right? They're thinking about tomorrow. They're thinking about the intel. They're processing the data, but they're not, trying to keep in their head where the planes are and who's going where and what's happening and all the stuff that the ops guys are focusing on. So a nice long conversation. Also, in other investigations or interviews, if you have a witness or something like that, you have your planning team call the witness and say, what can you tell me? What can you remember? What was the color of the plane that you saw flying overhead, and about what time of day was it? That kind of stuff. Planning section also does things like identifying the scenarios. That means, you have a plane that's gone missing. Well, what could have happened, right? We obviously kind of run through the big things. Okay, maybe they had a heart attack in flight. Maybe they were planning to go from point A to point B, and look, there's a giant mountain right in the way. So if they had planned to go from point A to point B and they impacted the terrain, it's probably that terrain right there on my map that's the highest probability area. So those kinds of scenarios, like what are all the other possibilities that could be that could be going through this pilot's mind? And when you talk to the family, they'll say something like, yeah, there was a family emergency, so he jumped in the plane. He was trying to get home as fast as possible. So you're thinking, okay, what if I'm in a plane and I'm flying, home, and I'm going from here to here, and I'm trying to get there as fast as possible? What kind of trouble might have I gotten into? That's the scenarios that the planning section chief is, or the planning section team is thinking through and developing tasks based on all of this sort of hypothetical, look at the map, assess the situation, talk to the intel, and figure out what might be going on with this person. They're not trying to make predictions. They're not trying to guess the right answer. They're trying to figure out what all the answers are. And then what you do is you write up all the tasks. So if it was a medical, heart attack in flight, we should be searching this route. And if it was a GPS encounter with terrain, we need to be focused on this mountain. And if it was running out of fuel, we should be over in this grid looking at this area because this is where they would have run out of fuel. Those sorts of things. The land speed record was the one from the Fawcett search where we had been told that he had a new jet car Steve Fawcett had been developing, and he had been flying over the Nevada salt flats, sort of scoping out where would he want to drive this new jet car so that he could break the land speed record. So when we heard about this as intel, we started developing as the intel team all these sort of areas of, okay, if I'm looking for flat area where I'm going to break a land speed record, I'm going to be looking in these parts of Nevada, this part of the grid, not into the mountains, but into these parts of the salt flats. And so then we had tasks written for all of those areas that we had sort of identified. Once you kind of follow that line of thinking, it generates, sometimes, the planning team can develop, 10, 20 tasks, and they hand the stack over to the ops people, and they're going, what am I supposed to do with all these things? Well, plans in developing all these things should also be prioritizing them. And they'll work with the incident commander to prioritize this level of stack of tasks to be able to say, okay, here's the stack, but they're in order. So start at the top and try to, do those ones first. And if you can't, skip down and do what you can. And so then the ops team is sort of running through the stack saying, right, I only have 3 planes, and then you've given me a task or a list of 15 things to do. This plane can do these 2 things, and this plane can do this one this morning and this one this afternoon. So the ops people are thinking about how to sort of chunk it out and figure out what to do with the resources that they have. Routes, grids, guesstimating how many resources. So if your task is something like, go search this mountain peak because it's a likely spot where they could have impacted. Yeah, I need 1 plane to do something like that. Or no, I should probably have 1 plane do the north side of the mountain in the morning and another plane come back in the evening and do the south side because the shadows change, right? So plans can think about how to do it without assigning the resource, but guessing. and say, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon, I'll just write the task up 2 times, writing morning and afternoon on them. And if ops can't do it, they can't come up with a plan in the morning, so it goes undone. But they do come up with a plan with the afternoon, then okay, they get the afternoon sortie, and then maybe tomorrow we can do the morning one. So ops fills the tasks as they can get to them. Again, this ICS 215 is the one that lists what are all the assignments. So it's a kind of like a spreadsheet saying, what are all the tasks that I've written? So I'll give you a stack, and then I'll give you the spreadsheet, which is sort of the cheat sheet for the stack. So if there are 15 things in my stack, there's also 15 rows on the spreadsheet. So then we can sit there and fill out together who's going to fill each one of these things, so that the spreadsheet becomes sort of the marriage of the people with the task itself. The other big thing the planning section chief is responsible for is the IEP. So it's not that the planning section chief is writing the IEP, you know, soup to nuts, 201, 203, 205, 206. It's that the planning section chief is bugging the people who are supposed to be writing it. So you bothering the medical person saying, hey, are you done yet? Can you get it to me? I need it by 8 p.m. tonight. And if the medical person's saying, I don't know what to do, I can't remember where the hospital is, the planning section chief can help and can sit down together and say, let's work on this. But the planning section chief shouldn't be writing the IEP. They're just supposed to be sort of compiling it, put it together, and then deliver it in the morning for the morning brief. And then the last thing on my list here, the planning section chief doing DMOB, is the thing that we recognize in CAP we are absolutely terrible at. When the search is over, usually everybody just disappears, poof, and it's over. We don't keep track of people signing out religiously. We don't keep track of where people are going, how sleepy they are before we let them leave base. There's all kinds of things that planning should be thinking about when in terms of demobbing, especially if like everybody's over in Oahu and you're going to demob a helo crew and they're going to fly home. You know, are they really, you know, is it 8 o'clock at night and now you're sending them home, right? Maybe they should spend the night. Maybe we should, you know, come up with some money or a sofa for them to just take it easy and demob reasonably and responsibly, rather than just letting everybody go with get-home-itis. And this is something that CAP has tried to do better at over the years, but has never successfully been able to actually execute. And there have been some terrible incidents of people falling asleep and driving off the road and different kinds of things. So our organization knows that this is a problem. We've had it for a long time. And there are some things that a planning section chief that's really on the ball, especially during like a WLE, you can kind of say, look, this is our demob plan. We're going to give people a fatigue survey. We're going to have people do a self-assessment. We're going to have them look at their partner and say, you know, yes, my partner looks like they're going to be all right to go home, and I'm signing off on their form, and I'm whatever, you know. All of that can be done. And would get us definitely more bonus points with the Air Force if we really were on the ball and did that kind of thing. SITSTAT, again, this is the maps. I'm sorry, the SITSTAT is the package. So it's the map and the clue log and the intel and the whole thing, the whole situation status, what's going on with our situation. In the morning, usually the general briefing will happen. Everybody comes into the room, everybody's ready for the day, and the plan section chief is usually the first one that goes in front of the group and says, okay, everybody, this is what we've got going on today. And they'll say, we have a missing plane, we have a hurricane, we have a tsunami, whatever the scenario is, and they'll tell you what the scenario is. We've covered this much area, and we've had been, you know, this is our 3rd operational period, and we're expecting to do these things today. We're going to be covering the south side of the island chain. We're going to be whatever it is. So the SITSTAT is sort of that whole comprehensive package that the plan section chief is responsible for. Technical specialist reports are things like the cell phone coverage. So if you've got a missing person and you've called Verizon and gotten through that legal drama to be able to say, okay, we've actually got some data here, that goes into the SITSTAT to be able to say, okay, this is part of our intel and part of our coverage, and we're putting it on our maps. What is the cell phone coverage? What's the part of the pie where we think this person might be? And obviously, sometimes the maps are wrong, sometimes they're right, sometimes the person's right on the edge. So all of that gets factored in, right? It's not like you just show the one thing. You're showing all of this data. The planning factory is called a planning factory because plans takes in all of the data that ops has gathered during the day, and they're reading all of the debriefing sheets, and they're thinking about all of these grid tracks, and they're compiling all the data after the crews have come home. Usually that means that plans starts their day in the evening after the planes are all down and when the sun has gone down. So plans usually sleeps through the day, gets up in the evening, works all night, delivers the package and the stack of tasks in the morning, and then goes to bed. So plans is usually completely out of phase with the rest of the ops. Now in CAP, this is really hard to do because it's really hard to actually have planning people go home when the ops is when the Air Force eval team is there, because everybody's excited and everybody wants to be there to be, going on with what's happening. And it's not like there's nothing for plans to do during the day, right? Obviously they can do these meetings and they can have these conversations and they can be gathering more intel. So there's sort of always something that plans can do. But in a big planning factory, you would have a team of people who are crunching these numbers and putting this data together, updating the clue log. And the idea is everybody kind of works through the night, and then in the morning they kind of deliver all the stuff and they say, okay, good morning, welcome everybody to another day. Here's what you're going to be doing. And they all say, good night, we're out of here, peace out. And that's when the planning factory will sort of shut down and go to bed, and then kind of wake up again at the end of the day or at the end of that period when all the ops are done and the planes are back and they now have data to give you again, then you start working again. Creating and segmenting the map, the probability of area map. It might not be something that was covered in ICS 300. It's definitely something covered in the SAR planning school. How to determine what the map is, how to update it, how to maintain it, how to segment it. All of those are very specific skills that belong in the SITSTAT and that are part of plans. And if you want to dive into that some more with me, I could definitely, I'm thinking about trying to do more of a class for plans, because I feel like this is a weak area, especially in CAP, that the skills that you need to be able to do this map management, because we don't do it for every UDF, we only do it for the evals, it's always sort of fake, or it's always forced because we're not doing it frequently. We sort of just train it occasionally. So our skills aren't really strong in this area, and that's true throughout the organization, coast to coast. So it's something we can work on. It's something, we can develop, and it's something that you don't have to be in the incident command post to do, right? So our being on remote islands doesn't make any difference for the plans. The plans people can be anywhere and doing these things. So this is something that, Hawaii could be really good at, because you don't have to be always in the incident command post to do these skills. So again, part of the SITSTAT is creating the assignments for tomorrow. So you're creating the tasks and you're putting out the things for not what we're going to do this afternoon or this morning. What you've delivered this morning, you worked on all night. So you're not creating the assignments that morning for what you're going to do in the afternoon. You're creating things, if you are there during the day, you're creating the assignments for Sunday. Guesstimating resources, letting logistics know so that, again, logistics can put out the page or try to figure out how to come up with some more crews. Again, logistics working with the ops team, because the ops team often is the one that knows really who's available. And then, so pre-planning, something that you can predict, like you can always predict that someday we're gonna have to demob. So plans can sit down and figure out what our demob plan is at any time during the search. But any other predictions that you have, like, what if we were to find this person up on top of this mountain? Well, we're gonna need to, call fire, figure out how to get a high angle, mountain team in there, these sorts of things. So plans can really deep dive into who are we going to call? Do we have the phone number for fire if we were to find them up on this area? These sort of other kind of predictions can be part of the SITSTAT. The last bullet point is the one that the Air Force really kind of holds us to all the time, which is they'll walk into plans at any point during the exercise and say, what's going on? Right, and it's sort of not fair, because while the planes are in the air, ops has the picture in their head of what's going on. Plans doesn't usually get the intel till the ops crews have come back and have debriefed, then planning will have the situation map and be able to say, well, here's what we've done, and here's what we've covered, and here's what we're following up on, and here's what the leads are that we're working on. Obviously, you know, it's a little tricky to be able to kind of say that to an Air Force evaluator. So you give them what you have. This is what I know right now. These are what the crews are in the air right now are looking for, these things, right? That's all you can do. All right, so again, just in review, the IC is developing the objectives, the plans are planning for tomorrow, and the ops are the doers. They're executing what's happening today. And that's where the kind of flow happens. So the IC figures out what to do, the plans people chew on it, and then the ops people do it. All right, we'll start talking about these meetings. The objectives meeting, so again, it's this first arrow. So you've gone through the initial response. This is the very first meeting. The objectives meeting is where the planning section chief is starting to look at their IAP. They're starting to look at the 202 form, and they're saying, okay, Mr. or Mrs. IC, what do you want us to do today? Or what do you want us to do tomorrow? So they might show the IC, here's all the intel we've got, here's what all of our data is leading us to, here's what the maps look like. And the IC wants to really digest all of this, really understand it, and have that situational awareness of where are we in this search, where are we in this exercise, and what should we be doing next? So again, the hasty reflex tasking is done. So now you're saying, okay, we searched a few high profile grids. We have a missing plane, right? They were going from this point to this point. We searched around the airports at both ends. We searched the direct route. What should we do next? Now the incident commander might say, okay, they're going from here to here. Let's search everything north of this mountain range. That's going to be our objective for today. Today is going to be to cover the north side. Tomorrow we'll work on the south side. So once the IC has figured out what the objective is for the day, now the plans can say, okay, with that objective in mind, let's go write some tasks. Obviously, this is straight out of this cut and paste thing is right out of the ICS manual. So it talks about what the agenda is and how to run the meeting and how to make your objectives smart. So simple, what's M? I can't remember. Manageable, actionable, time dependent, all of these sorts of things. It's great to do, to have very specific and concrete objectives. But really what you want to get out of this meeting is that the IC understands, has full situational awareness, understands everything that's going on, and the planning section chief has some direction so that they can sit down and say, okay, we're going to focus on these things. And it might be something like we're going to do containment. Sometimes the objectives are, in many of our scenarios, especially the ones where we've got the Air Force breathing down our neck, the scenario is that we're training people. So if the objective is to train 5 mission pilots, then the planning section chief can say, okay, I'm going to execute on that. I'm going to make sure that my assignments are for the mission pilots. I'm not making assignments that are for the aerial photographer in the back or for the scanner or for an observer that's trying to get some UDF or Becker training or something. I'm focused on the mission pilots. The training is for the mission pilots. We're paying attention to the mission pilots, whatever it is. So in our scenario, sometimes training is the objective, and that's fine for these things. All right, incident priorities are not objectives, but incident priorities are the big 4, and the incident commanders really should have these 4 things, tattooed on the back of their arms so that they never forget what order we're trying to do things in, right? So life, stabilization, property, and then the objective, whether it's disaster relief or HAEMA has asked us for something. Life, obviously, first. So if we have a missing person and we're out here, puttering around with some aerial photography, the missing person search takes precedence. So you would divert a plane to go look for the missing person or to look for the ELT that's an activation ELT, not just a city ELT, but you've got something in the mountains or something like that. You would actually divert planes from lower priority tasks in order of priority. So again, if you're a planning section chief, you also might write these things down to just when you're having the conversation with the incident commander, you can guide them and say, I know it's hard to develop an objective. I know it's hard to make them smart and all the other things, but let's think about, you know, what a good objective for tomorrow might be that has something to do with life stabilization, or stabilizing the incident might be containment, or the kind of thing where you're trying to minimize the incident. Like for the faucet search, for example, we knew how much fuel the plane had. So you start with the pin and you say, okay, you can only have gotten this far. And you say, okay, well, that's a huge amount of area, right? So how can we stabilize this incident? How can we make it smaller? And that's our objective for the day. Our objective for the day for the planning section people is to try to figure out what to do with the circle and how to kind of cut it down. So sometimes your objective can be something very specific, like, can we say that he stayed east of these mountains or west of these mountains, or that he wasn't seen below this? How can we shrink the area to search? Oh, here we go. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time sensitive. So here's an example of a smart objective, which is electronic search. Means you have a plane that's going to do a UDF with the right kind of Becker, and they've got the right equipment on board. They're not just flying the route, but they don't have anything turned on. So an electronic search of the route that the missing plane filed. So we're going to just follow the route, and you're going to do it by noon today, right? So you put a time limit on it so that you know that we're going to do that one in the morning. And if that's the objective, one of the objectives that the incident commander comes up with, then you put that in the stack. The planning section chief writes that up as a task. The ops people say, this is the crew I can assign to it, and away somebody goes. All right, so the idea of having this meeting with planning section chief and the IC, if you do it at like 10 a.m., that means usually the crews have launched, so there's a lot less drama going on. Again, like I said, ideally your planning section chief's in bed, but maybe you have a staff member or somebody that can sit down with the IC and go over all of this data. But in CAP, since we do have the planning section chiefs there on the ground during the eval, it's easy to just have the planning section chief and the IC do this. They sit down, they have the meeting at 10. You tell the Air Force evaluators, hey, we're doing the objectives meeting. They come, they watch you do it, and you get a little tick box, next to our thing that we're following the planning P. The IC runs the meeting, setting the goals and develops. After the meeting, the PSC is, kind of running with those objectives, and any other details or nuances, or if the Coast Guard is involved and I need the IC to go ask them something, the planning section chief follows up. All right, so here's one of the practice objectives. And again, this particular objective is to practice developing containment objectives. So you have this information. Here you've got a plane, cream with green stripes, departed South Tahoe, VFR, overdue that evening. No reports, no flight plan, nothing. So how do you contain somebody that's going from Tahoe to an unknown destination? Like he's just, he's not going anywhere in particular. He was just messing around. So, how do you say, okay, yes, he could have run out of fuel. We're going to search all of California and Nevada and some of Oregon, right? Or, what other kind of things that can you do for containment? So here's what the map looks like. I thought I had some overlays here. So South Tahoe, you can see that the bottom of the lake here, and you can kind of say, there's a lot of mountains there. Where would he have gone? What was he up to? These sorts of things. So here's some of the things you think about. What are the possible scenarios? So the objective can be, all right, planning section, go develop me these possible scenarios. And the planning people will go back and say, okay, the possible scenario is medical or mechanical or weather, and then they'll work it up and they'll say, if it was medical. And they go back and they stare at the map and they say, okay, if it was medical and he was messing around, he could be anywhere, right? If it was mechanical, then maybe he went up into the mountains. If it was dials of fuel, yeah. All the things that could be possible. So develop the scenarios. So these are the objectives you're telling the planning section chief. Go develop me the scenarios. gather me the flight details. What do we know from the FAA? Was a flight plan filed? What do the people on the ground know? So go interview all the people at the airport. Tell me what they know about where this person was going. Were they leaving the airport on a joyride? Did the fuel guy, you know, top him off so that he could go do something or other? What did he tell the hangar staff? Like, you know, what can you find out for those flight details? And then for the afternoon, go route search the 2 most likely flight paths. So route search means if you think he went GPS direct from here to here, or you find out that he was going to visit a sick sister or something like that, you figure out what you can gather intel-wise by noon, and then by the afternoon, we're going to go execute these 2 flights. So then obtain a 5% POD in the 3 highest grids, meaning you think that there was some terrain involved, so you pick 3 grids by the afternoon, and you go 5% POD is 1 flight. So you have 1 flight and a grid. So these are the kinds of things that an incident commander can come up with the objectives. And then entering unified command with the sheriff by this evening. That's always a good kind of objective for an incident commander to kind of come up with. If you guys want this slide so that you have some examples in your head, especially as a planning section person, to be able to say to the incident commander, maybe we should be looking in these directions. Maybe these are some of the kinds of things we should be thinking about for objectives for today. You guys can have these slides, no problem. All right, was there another question? Sorry, I have to actually look at yeah, radius of fuel. That's, the radius of fuel one is just huge. And so that, it's fine, it's a good one, but it's just one of the things where you can say, okay, if there was a mechanical. So, well, I remember one search I was on in Auburn, they had something like, you know, we sent a planning person down to the hangar, and the planning person walks into the room and they look over and they go, why is there a fuel tank sitting there in the corner? Why is the fuel tank not in the plane? Well, there's a story behind that. Okay, tell me the story. Why is the fuel tank not in the plane? Well, the fuel tank was dirty, and so he took it out and he cleaned it, and then it was cracked, so we bought a new one, and the new one's in the plane now. So you're like, okay, if there's a problem with the fuel tank and that's why he's missing, these are the kind of scenarios we're going to start writing. So now you start as a planning person saying, okay, we have intel, we have a clue. There's a problem with the fuel tank, and he just tried to repair it himself. So if the fuel tank is not working as expected, you know, now the radius of fuel has gotten a little smaller. So you can kind of start to work with the intel that you collect based on what you've got there. All right. I know we're starting to run long. Let's talk about the general staff briefing. The rest of these meetings get shorter and shorter, I promise. The general staff briefing is, and some of these are very short, like this one. Once the IC and the planning section chief have sat down and done their powwow and gone through all of the things, then the IC says, okay, now I've got my objectives that I've decided, and the planning section chief is writing them up. But then the IC needs to go brief everybody and say, okay, everybody on the general staff. So this is the operations section chief and the logistics section chief and the CUL and the PIO. All right, everybody, I'm going to get you together and just tell you what the objectives are, right? So this meeting is very short, and really the IC is just saying, all right, get my staff together for a minute so I can tell you all what the objectives are, and it's over. So again, it's a very short meeting, usually shortly after this other meeting has happened. So once the objectives are decided, then you go brief everybody and tell everybody. On a SARX, so especially on like the WLE or something, you want to have the planning section chief and the incident commander do their little powwow thing and figure out what they want the objectives to be, basically as soon as they know what the scenario is. So as soon as the Air Force tells us what our first few taskings are and what the situation is, whether it's a tsunami, once we know that it's a tsunami scenario for our WLE, then the planning section chief and the IC develop the objectives, and then obviously the IC has planning calls prior to the SARX starting. So prior to Saturday morning, the IC will tell everybody what the objectives are. So this is sometimes done just, quickly on a phone call where you say, okay, everybody, what we've heard from the Air Force is it's a tsunami scenario, and our objectives are going to be, for the first operational period, are going to be containment and, focused on the east side of the islands, and open up an incident command post over at wing headquarters, whatever it is that the objectives are. You can just, rattle them off on a conference call. So this particular meeting, by the book, is run by the PSC, even though it's just the IC telling everybody what everything is. So the PSC sort of calls the meeting, says, all right, everybody, thank you for coming to the IC's meeting. We have a tsunami scenario, and then the IC takes it over and says, here's what I've decided the objectives are. After the meeting is basically the same as before. They're following up on all the details. All right, the tactics meeting. This is the next big one. And this is where the PSC and the operations section chief have their kind of come together meeting. And the point of this meeting is that the IC is not there. So the first thing that happens this meeting is the plans team reviews everything that's going on. This is what the scenario is. This is what the IC told us the briefing is. Usually they come into this meeting with that 215 work matrix. So here's the scenarios that I've been working up. Again, remember that IC told them to do this, right? So these are the scenarios. Here's my mechanical scenario. Here's my medical scenario. Here's my maps. Here's all of the tasks. And usually it's not that I've written them all up yet, but I've got that Excel sheet, the cheat sheet that's kind of listing what all of them are going to be done, right? And I'm going to be working on writing out, the lat long and the maps and putting together the packet of each of the tasks. But right now I'm starting with my spreadsheet so that I've got quick notes for what all the things are. So here's my objective that the IC gave me, gather the flight details by noon. So here are 3 tasks that I'm thinking of coming up with. And so this point is when the operations section chief says, yeah, okay, I can have some people go to the family. I've got somebody that can go do that. Or no, you need to have your people go do that. The plan section people says, all right, I'm going to get on the phone with Guy and do this. I'm going to call the FAA and say, I know you guys don't want to give me the flight plan, but you have to. We've got a missing plane here and I need these details. And the FAA will always give you a hard time, but if you call them back enough times, eventually they'll give it to you. So plans kind of tells the operations section chief, what are the things that I'm going to be working on? And the operations section chief can kind of get that feedback of, no, I think these 2 things, these 2 scenarios, so here's the next one, right? Route search the most likely class paths by the afternoon. So here's 4 paths, right? Here you go, operations section chief, I've identified these 4 paths. The operations section chief looks at that and says, those 4 paths are kind of funny. I think I've got a plane coming in from over here, so I'm going to have this one search this path while he's coming to base. And then I'm going to have this other plane do an AM and another plane go do a PM. So, right, so the operations section chief is figuring out how he would execute that without plans necessarily saying, I want the Maui team to do this and this team to do this. You let the operations team make those kinds of decisions. The next thing, same thing. So I've got these 3 high quarter grids and we're going to do this by, this later this evening, right? This is now 1800 hours, so it's almost getting dark, but we want to get this done before the sun goes down. So here are the 3 grids. And the operations section chief looks on this and says, all right, by that time of afternoon, I'll have these 3 planes on hand. So I will then task them to be wheels up, by 4 o'clock in the afternoon so that they're going to get into those grids and back before sunset. So the operations section chief is making the actual decisions, but the plans person is sort of prompting it. So this is why this workflow class really helps keep the operations and the planning section people from stepping on each other's toes and telling each other what to do by having this meeting, this tactics meeting. Again, the outcome is to have organized assignments and the resources assigned to the tasks. So again, this is right from the book where the OSC is presenting it, but what we're saying is the PSC has the draft and then the OSC fills it in and says, okay, yes, I can work with what you're presenting with me. Let's put it together, and by the end of this meeting, we will have a 215 that has tasks and crews to do the crews. We've got it together, and we can go show the incident commander what we're ready to do. So again, suggested time for this is going to be after crews are in the air, right? You don't want to be trying to have these meetings while the operations section chief is busy trying to get planes up, right? So once everybody's in the air and the operations section chief can sit down with the planning section chief and the logistics section chief and the cull and the safety officers and say, let's hash through this and make sure we're ready for Sunday, right? To say what the tasks are and who's going to fly them tomorrow. So this planning section chief coming with the draft ICS, this is like CAP specific. What you saw on that last slide is that normally in ICS, the OSC would have it, but it makes a lot more sense in our organization for plans to come to it. Technically, the meeting is run by the operations section chief, but the planning person is right there. So it's really just the two of them kind of getting together. And the deliverable is a fully developed ICS 215 and an operations org chart, right? To be able to say who's coming, who's doing what, who's going to be on the ground, who's in the air, we're ready. MSO is there to provide safety issues, and logistics is there to talk about any other logistical issues that might be there. All right. I think we've hashed through this enough, so I think I'm going to skip this particular exercise. What we've got here is a scenario with our SIT stat being that it's clear, no problems. We have an objective search. We have our, point A, point B. That's where they allegedly went. If the scenario was medical or mechanical, you might say, I want to focus on this grid 294 because that's where the highest peak mountain is. But there's probably a 5% chance that they crashed on takeoff and a 5% they crashed on landing, that kind of thing. So this is what plans kind of choose on and works over. And then if the assignment is route search it or grid search it to do the quarter grids and do each of them twice. So the two yellow ones are being done twice and the two blue ones have only been done once, that kind of thing, depending upon whether it's morning or afternoon. So again, at the meeting, oh, so here's another scenario. So again, an example. So again, the scenario was departed at MVFR. Visibility is bad. Search each high POD once. So in this scenario, point of departure and point of destination are a little more populated. So the idea of focusing in on the grids was more viable. So if what you're trying to do is search the grids, then you focus on those quarter grids. So ROW is the rest of the world. So the probability that she took off and did something else or that she's not in this particular part of the map is still pretty high. So sometimes an objective that an IC might come up with is, how can we determine that the person has not like jumped ship, moved to Kansas, done something else? Well, we got to talk to the family. We got to do interviews. We can figure out how to minimize rest of world if that's the objective, right? If the plans people are going to go do that, then they focus on that and they go do that. All right, after the tactics meeting is over, that's when planning starts drafting the IAP. Obviously, we talked about the planning is not writing the IAP all by themselves. They've got to get everybody else to help write it. They assign the deadline and tell all the other people, give me your data by this evening or whenever I want it by before I can go to bed. And then planning people start planning for this next one, which is the planning meeting. And this is not far from the end. All right, the planning meeting, again, short. The planning meeting, you go over the objectives, you show, so objectives are what the IC defined. You show the map, this is our probability areas, this is what we're working with. You tell them, okay, it's a missing person, a missing plane, they were here, they were going there. It was a nice sunny day. Here's what the operations section chief is saying, who I expect to come. I've got these 6 planes, or I'm sorry, I've got these 4 planes and these 2 UDF teams available. That's what I'm working with. And then here's what that 215 looks like. So the work assignments, column number 5, these grid search, route searches, these are the different assignments that the plans people came with and said, these are the tasks and these are the things that we want to do. The left column are the individual people that then get, yeah, we're going to send this crew to do that thing. So plans comes with column 5 sort of roughed in. Operations puts people into the left column. You talk about over here on the right, these are like, do we need an observer for this kind of, for a route search? Yes. Do we need an observer for a scanner for, you know, an aerial photography? No, we need an aerial photographer. So whatever the needs are, whether you need a turbo or a 206 or whatever, all those things kind of get worked out on this worksheet. Safety message. The IC is at this meeting. So this is the first time the IC sees this data. So now the IC is like, okay, my plans and my ops people have had their powwow. They have got their act together now. They've identified what the tasks are and they've identified who's going to do things, and they're on the same page ready together. So again, the planning meetings, the goal of it is that everybody agrees that this is what we're going to be doing on Sunday, so tomorrow, right? This is not what we're going to be doing today. PSC is the one who runs it. Again, sort of the same things over and over again. Tell everybody what the scenario is. Tell everybody what you're going to do. Tell everybody what the objectives are, over and over again. So again, this is something that you kind of do at the end of the day. All the command staff, so the chaplain, all the PIO, all of the people are there. All of the general staff are there. The branch directors. So this one, the AOBDs and any other specialists that might be tasking people or working in base staff attend this meeting so that they see the picture. This is what we're doing. These are the objectives. This is the list of tasks, and these are the crews that we're going to be doing tomorrow. So the PSC has the draft IEP at this point, as accurate as possible. The OSC is briefing. This is what I'm going to have my people doing tomorrow, and then the command staff can you know, provide their personal expertise. Like the PIO might say, okay, well, if you're going to have people on Maui tomorrow, can I get a ride? Right? So now the OSC says, okay, well, how can I get that PIO from Oahu to Maui tomorrow? That'll be another task that I have to work on after, you know, hearing about this, right? That kind of stuff. After this meeting is over, now the planning section chief is finalizing the IAP and putting the stamp on it and getting the IC to sign off on it. Hypothetically, having the IAP done by 8 o'clock at night is great because then everybody can go to bed like normal humans. But like I said, in the real world, when you're doing a search, the plans people are up all night, reading the debriefing reports, looking at the tracks, analyzing this data. The IAP doesn't usually get done till like 6 a.m., right? And then they deliver it first thing in the morning. All right, they call this the operations briefing, but in CEP we usually call it the general briefing. That's sort of one of those terms that we've had for a long time in this organization. This is the one that we do at the start of the SAREC. So in the first thing in the morning, and we get everybody there. So this is the all call, all hands meeting. And at this point, the IAP is either posted on the wall or handed out to everybody or hanging on the whiteboard so that when the participants show up in the morning, they need to start reading it to understand, okay, here's the scenario, here's the objectives, here's what we're going to try to accomplish today, here's my safety message. You know, they don't have their assignment, so they don't know which part they're going to be doing, but at least they see the big picture, the IAP with the comm plan, and they can start writing down their notes of, okay, all right, I got to remember TAC 2, and oh, they want us to be using GPSs, I'll go make sure my batteries are charged. All the things in the IAP are things that when the pilots and the air crew and the ground team members show up in the morning, they read that IAP and they kind of get ready for the day, right? It gives everything. So again, the general briefing is run by the PSC. They do all the same things, review the objectives, review the priorities, review the situation. The OSC stands up in front of the room and tells everybody, this is what we're doing today. We're going to be flying these grids and we're going to be taking these pictures and we're going to be, you know, sending ground teams to these 2 airports to go interview, you know, the staff that are working at these airports. The safety officer takes their turn, stands in front of everybody and says, you know, be safe out there, everybody. You know, weather could turn on us at any time, whatever's going on. Logistics. It's nice to have a checklist for this. I actually have a giant checklist now because I've got everybody's checklist in it. So, you know, it's easy to get lost in details when you start these meetings. People start talking about, well, there was this time when and whatever. So you try to keep this briefing on task because everybody's in the room and nobody does anything until the meeting's over, right? When that conference call ends and the meeting is over and you say, all right, everybody, go do it, you know, then the activity starts. So you don't want the meeting to go too long. So sometimes the objectives meeting, the general briefing is at 10 a.m. Sometimes it's a little earlier. But if you think about that operations briefing or the general briefing, having it at 7 a.m., so that's the bottom of the screen, 7 a.m., 8 a.m., sort of when people are going to be there, you know, you pin that one, and then the rest of the timeline kind of falls out of it. So whether, you know, your meetings are on time is one thing, but it's also nice to kind of publish the timeline and say, okay, hey, you know, Air Force evaluators, we have this goal that we're going to do our meetings on this timeline. So be here, right, when we expect to be doing the meetings. On our last eval, that was now 2 years ago, we told the Air Force that we were having the general briefing, I think it was 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., and then they got there late, right? So they got there at like 5 minutes after, and they're like, nobody's here. So they sat around waiting. Meanwhile, we had the briefing, and then we were done, and they're like, when were you going to do the general briefing? Like, we just did it. But we were in that room over there, and you guys were standing out here in the hallway wondering where everybody was. So, you know, posting it and then also sort of saying where the meeting is probably a good idea. All right, this is almost done. I talked a lot about this first operational period or that hasty search and that sort of thing. The idea with a pop-up task, like I had said before, is if the plane is doing one thing and you have something come up, like, you know, you have a life-saving or and the ELT goes off and you need to divert crews, that's the pop-up task. And the pop-up tasks don't go to plans. So that's the big difference with them and why they're special. Because when a pop-up task happens and the IC suddenly gets this notification or they get this email and they're like, oh, I've got this thing, I've got to go do this right now, this is an interrupt, you hand it right to the ops people, because the ops people will look at it and say, yes, I've got a plane that's in that area, I'll divert them and let them do it. The planning people don't know where the planes are at all times. They know where the planes hypothetically could have been, but they don't actually know what has happened. Like, oh, this plane had a mechanical, so they went out and I had to bring another crew in. The ops people know those details, not the plans people. So the pop-up task goes directly to ops, hypothetically with a carbon copy to plans, so plans knows about them and then can work them into the system, but really ops gets these things and just starts executing on them. And again, plans' head is in the game looking about tomorrow. So they're not thinking about what are we going to do today. And when a pop-up task, it's something that needs to be done immediately, plans is not working on it. So going through the full planning P for day 2 occurs on day 1. And then in a SAREX, we try to do the first planning P cycle right up to the general briefing on the phone or on Friday night or something like that, so that Saturday morning when you walk in the door, you have the general briefing and you've basically done all the hasty search and all the other stuff has happened. And now you're just rolling with, this is our first operational period, but it's really our second operational period, that kind of thing. There might be additional considerations when you have somebody like FEMA, because it's a federal asset, or something like the police. If the police, you know, if you've got posse comitatus going on. So the IC, again, is the person that's talking to the customer or that's working with the customer to determine whether this request is appropriate. And if the IC determines appropriate, they'll either hand it to ops or they hand it to plans or they hand it to both. This is where having a deputy IC or an agency liaison to sit there and just sift through the customer requests and to be calling the customers and saying, when you say you want photos, what kind of photos do you really want? And where am I supposed to give you these photos? Can I, you know, bring them to your office? This sort of thing. So the deputy IC can really chew on those kind of details with the customer, or an agency liaison can do that as well. Customer requests, treat them as new objectives, whereas the objective is that high level thing, and then the plans people go and work up what the task is. So just because the customer requested a plane to go from point A to point B, don't treat that as, here's a task, right? Treat that as, okay, plans person, here's a request. And the plans people look at it and they go, well, it looks like a task to me. Okay, we'll write it up as a task. But the plans people are going to chew on it. They're going to put it on their map. They're going to look at the probabilities on it, and they're going to determine whether this faux task that has come from a customer is a legitimate task, and maybe it needs to turn into 2 tasks, or maybe it can be combined with some other tasks. So the plans people really need to have a moment with it before you just kind of start handing it down the chain to the ops people and say, yep, we've got a task, right? So just because it comes in an email, let the plans people look at it, let the plans people plot it, let the plans people print out the map, staple the map on it, and then hand it over to ops, right? All right, there's the example of the pop-up task. So in this scenario, you've got you're searching for somebody, and then some intel came in that said maybe she went to this other place. So okay, obviously we want to sort of drop everything and have somebody call this other place and find out if she did go there, right? So obviously that's just a phone call. You can just have a plans person pick up the phone and do that, or an intel person, right? That kind of a pop-up task can be easily done quickly. You don't have to divert a plane to go land at some other airport. You can call the airport first and find out if they've seen that tail number, those kinds of things. That's it. So thank you all. I know it was a long thing, and I will send out slides so you guys can have the sheet. Any questions? I'll open it up for questions.
Dana, I've got one. This is Wayne.
Yeah.
When I look at that Manning, it looks like it takes a cast of thousands to really execute this. And I'm just wondering, in real life, with CAP being a small, especially in Hawaii wing, how many people does it really take to execute this properly?
So you're absolutely right. Planning is a big deal, and it's a lot of work. And, you know, Joe just went to the Inland SAR School, which is where you sort of learn some of these details about planning and the math and the algorithms and how to work up these charts. And it's a ton of work. It's a ton of things. And it's something that we don't have good core competency of in this organization, because we spend all our time doing UDF, and we usually have like one IC and one plane and go, right? And that's it. So it's the smallest ICS, you know, deployment. You don't even have plans people. You hardly ever even plot it on a map. So we're not good at it, is what I'm saying. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't know what the bar is and what we're supposed to be doing. We need to be aware of where we're supposed to be kind of getting to, even if we don't deploy ICS like that regularly, because like I said, for the evals, we do get judged on it, even though we don't have the staff, we don't have the resources, we don't have people trained to that level. Even, like I'm saying, across the organization, even in California, even in Massachusetts, even in Georgia, they don't have great planning people. But what's interesting about planning is, like I said, you don't have to be there. So you can train people to sit at home and do plans. You can train people to sit at home and have call you and say, I need you to make these 4 phone calls. I need you to, let me just double check it. Things are dying here. All right, can you guys still hear me? All right. So what I'm saying is we don't have the people for it, but it is also something we can ask for. So if we have that IMAT team, right, they really want to help us and they really want to do things. And what I keep wanting to have them help us with is plans. So if we had like one planning person here and then the rest of the planning factory and all the staff over in the mainland somewhere, and then, you know, you've got one person that's a weather expert, he's producing weather charts, telling us what the hurricanes are, and he's following all the data, and then he's just feeding it to us, right, as it goes. You know, then we don't have to have a weather expert here on the ground, you know, taking up one of our bodies, one of our warm bodies. Same thing with, you know, the planning maps, somebody that's working up the calculations or whatever. We can have somebody like that on the mainland who doesn't even really know the terrain. They don't have to have local knowledge to be able to, you know, put the charts in and put, you know, numbers on the charts. They do have to have no local knowledge when you're starting to think of the scenario. Like, if it was medical, where would he have gone? If it was you know, so all of those hypotheticals, that's where the local knowledge is good. But you don't need to have like a room full of people with local knowledge just to you know, have those deep thoughts. You just need 1 or 2 to be able to kind of jog the discussion and get this going. Again, you know, I sort of have, you know, dreams of building up our planning section chief. I mean, our planning section skills, and sort of where I've focused on has been the photo processing, right? Because that's sort of an obvious, easy place to start. There's an obvious need to have a group of people that can do photo processing. Obviously, they would all work for plans, And again, they can work in the evening, after work. If the crews go up in the morning, take a bunch of photos, then the planning team can sit down in the evening, look at those photos all night long, and in the morning, hand them to the customer and say, all right, Haima, this is what we've got for you, in terms of good photos from what we took yesterday, that kind of stuff. So that's where we can start building our expertise and start building our group of people. But you're absolutely right. We have to be careful who we're plugging into this, because we are pulling them off of other things in order to put them into plans. Great question. Anybody else? All right, well, I will send you guys the slides, and if you find yourself looking at those exercises and wanting to ask questions or understand more about, because I didn't really go through the exercises, like what do these exercises mean and how am I supposed to get these results from this scenario, right? How am I supposed to have figured this kind of thing out in this way? Just call me and I can talk you through it one-on-one, because there is a lot here that isn't covered in the ICS book. It's sort of like reading between the lines. And it is what works for this organization in the way that we fly, right? The way that, pilots know what pilots know, and planning people know some things about what the pilots are doing, but they don't need to be doing the same things that ops is doing, right? Really, we need the ops people to be focusing on what's happening and the planning people to be focusing on future, what's happening tomorrow.